Hello and welcome to Uncommon Law, my podcast about true stories from my life experience of over 50 years as a lawyer and trial judge. This is a look at the law from the inside out, stuff they don't teach in law school. This is Judge Rudy Greco, retired Justice of the New York State Supreme Court. Mickey Mantle and Willie Mays, two of the greatest athletes who ever played baseball in American history, both of them called my friend Jimmy Jacobs the greatest athlete they had ever seen. That's pretty high praise from those guys. Jimmy was an all-star track athlete at UCLA, as well as a leading swimmer in NCAA competition for UCLA. He was also a world-class pistol and shotgun marksman, skeet shooting and pistol shooting at ranges. And every year, when he lived in New York in his later years, he would compete against the number one marksman from the graduating class of the New York City Police Academy. And Jimmy never lost one of those head-to-head matches. He was fabulous hand-eye coordination. He was also 20-year undefeated world champion in four-wall handball. He was never beaten in competition all over the world in 20 years and never lost his title till he retired. He had such hand-eye coordination. He showed me a demonstration of it, and I was amazed. He said, go up to the handball court here. We're at a four-wall handball court, and tape a quarter any way you want on the front wall within bounds, and come back. He said, okay, now I'm going to hit the ball, and I'm going to play it off the back wall because four-wall handball has a back wall. And he says, I'll need 3 shots to zero in. And he had 3 practice shots to zero in. And then he just hit that quarter time after time, playing most of the time with his back to the front wall, playing the ball off the back wall. I mean, it was just the most remarkable thing you'd ever want to see. And that's the kind of hand-eye coordination he had. And he was, as I said, undefeated world champion four-wall handball. And he also told me that anytime he was losing a match, in those rare instances when he was behind in the score, he would imagine himself to be Robin of Batman and Robin fame from the comic books, action comic books. And that was no coincidence because he had, as a young man, assembled one of the world's great collection of action comic books, Superman and Captain America, etc. And he said psychologically he would imagine himself as Robin because Robin always came back and came out on top, no matter what the precarious situation was. And he used that psychologically as a device, to help him gather himself and overcome the opposition. And he was spectacular. He used to practice regularly at the 92nd Street Y here in New York City, and he used to hit handball with a fellow's name was Lou Russo, who was the United States handball champion, conventional handball, single wall handball. And he and Lou played for years and years and years until Jimmy one day quit in the middle of a practice session, practice games that they were playing. And he walked off the court. And Lou said, "What's the matter, Jimmy?" And Jimmy said, "I can't take it anymore, Lou. I can't take it. I'm not going to play anymore. I've had enough." He said, "Well, what do you mean? What are you talking about? I don't know what you're talking about." He said, "Lou, you cheat." He said, "When my ball is out, you say, when my ball is in, you say it's out. When your ball is out, you say it's in. If it's short, you say it's long. If it's long, you say it's short. You block me illegally." He says, "There's no end to the cheating that you're doing." He says, "I'm just fed up with the whole thing." And Lou looked at him and said, "Jimmy, you're fed up? I've been doing that for 17 years, and the best I ever got in any game was 3 points against you." He said, "Now you're fed up?" He said, "What's the matter with you?" And that's a testament to Jimmy's ability. He was just a spectacular player. And Lou Russo told that story as a regular opponent of Jimmy's. In any event, I met Jimmy in the mid-'80s. He was probably in his late 40s at that time, mid to late 40s at that time. I had been the lawyer for Gleason's Gym, and one of the trainers, one of my clients, he was an assistant trainer for a fighter I managed, a young Puerto Rican kid from Williamsburg in Brooklyn, Roberto Vinas. This guy was named Victor Machado. He was an assistant trainer for Vinas, and he was approached by 3-time world champion Wilfred Benitez to be Wilfred's trainer. And he signed on for the job, which was a big honor. And Wilfred was a very, very phenomenal fighter, going for a fourth title, a middleweight title at that time. And Victor recommended me. Wilfred needed a lawyer, and he recommended me. And Wilfred was managed by Jimmy Jacobs and Bill Caton, who was his partner in a business venture called the Big Fights, Inc. Bill Caton was an advertising man, and Jimmy was involved with Bill in procuring 95% of all the existing archival boxing film in the world. So if you saw, and which they licensed all over the world, if you saw anything on TV involving John L. Sullivan or Jack Johnson or anybody, or Jack Dempsey or any of the old fighters, Joe Louis, anything at all, it was licensed by the Big Fights. They had it all, and they kept all of it until the mid-'90s. They had a lock on the whole market when Don King and Bob Arum and some of the promoters realized how much value there was in the film, and they used to have the fighters sign over their film rights to the promoters, to themselves, for future profit. But Jimmy and Bill owned the vast majority of all the archival boxing film in the world. And came a time when Jimmy and I were flying to Las Vegas together to join Wilfred and open up a 10-day training camp there in his middleweight campaign for the title at 160 pounds. And it's a long flight. And Jimmy opened up to me personally, which is I took as a compliment, because Jimmy was very close to the vest. He was a wonderful personality. I mean, to look at him, he was probably about 5'10", big shoulders, very trim waist. There wasn't an ounce of fat on Jimmy Jacobs, and there wasn't an ounce of fat in his conversation or his comportment with other people. He was very precise and to the point in his language and his conversations. He wouldn't even waste the conversation with anybody he didn't want to be talking to. He was totally focused. So the fact that he would sit down and talk to me and started telling me about his background, I took as a personal compliment. It was pretty interesting. And I asked him, I said, well, how? He told me about, college and being playing ball and actually swimming and the track stuff. And then he told me about how he got into boxing. And I said, how was that? He said, well, actually, he says, it was a mistake. I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, I went to the 1939 World Fair and I saw the first television. And the first television was a wonderful thing. He said, but it was tiny. He says the screen was only a few inches across. And I said to myself, gee, I wonder what's going to fit on that thing in the way of sports. I said, well, maybe table tennis. He said, but who watches table tennis? It's not going to be that interesting. He said, but the big spectator sport, the only spectator sport that I could think of that had mass interest was boxing. I said, boxing will fit perfectly on that small screen, He said, what did I know that the screens would grow later on and everything would be on it? He said, but I thought the only thing that was going to be there was boxing. And since I had already collected a vast comic book collection, I was a collector at heart. And I thought if I can go and collect the boxing film, I might be able to make a living at it when this television came out to the general public. And this stuff, of course, would fit that small screen. He said, so I went to my father, who was a wealthy guy. He said, my father was very wealthy. He had a factory that manufactured furniture and employed 2,500 people. He said, he also owned the rights to the first non-metal zipper. I think it was a nylon zipper, if I recall Jimmy telling me. I'm not sure. And he says the first order for the nylon zipper was for 20 million pieces by the Defense Department for uniforms, he said. So, my dad had a lot of money, he said. So I sat down. I wanted to borrow some money for the boxing collection. And I approached my dad. He says, he was a wonderful guy, my father. He said, Dad, he said, I have a problem. I want to talk to you. And my father, he says, in his own wonderful way, he said, Jimmy, sit down. There are only two kinds of problems, those we can solve and those we can solve. Now, which one is it? Just tell me about it. He said, so I sat down and I explained to him my idea for, fitting boxing on television and licensing this stuff around the world when everybody had televisions and that sort of stuff. And he said, have you figured out financially what you have to do? He said, yes. He said, I figured it out and I have a plan. He said, I want to borrow $6 million and I'll pay you back over 12 years, $500,000, $500,000 a year plus interest for 12 years. I'll be able to do that the way I've got this thing worked out. And his father said, well, I hope you've thought this out. I know you're a very focused guy, and I think you have a good business plan. Okay, I'll give you the money, and you can pay me back. So he did, and he hooked up in this endeavor with a television advertising man, Bill Caton, who was a very media savvy guy in radio and television at that time. And the two of them were perfect gentlemen. I mean, Jimmy and Bill, they were absolutely elegant guys to deal with. Everything they said, they meant. You could deal with them on a handshake. When they had to write something down, it was very funny. They would write their own contracts on paper. They would get the nearest piece of paper, a blank piece of paper, and with a pen or a pencil, whatever was handy, write out exactly the terms of the contract that they were talking about. They would sign it, you would sign it, and you could go to the bank with whatever was on that piece of paper. They were really, really, really brilliant. So the flight to Las Vegas ended in that conversation. Although I was in Jimmy's company then for the next 10 days, we were constant companions around the clock because the boxing only took up a few hours a day in the morning. And then early in the morning, we would go out, accompany Wilfred on his road work, which was 2 o'clock in the morning in Las Vegas because that was the only time it was cool enough to do the road work at that time of the year. So we enjoyed ourselves, and Jimmy's wife joined us, and she was a fabulous gal, Lebanese-American gal, absolutely beautiful, elegant, ladylike person, most genteel kind of person you ever want to meet, Lorraine. And we became very, very close friends, she and my wife and Jimmy and his wife over the years. Well, getting back to the flight, when the flight arrived in Las Vegas, we then ended up with a car to the Dunes Hotel where the fight was going to take place and where we were scheduled to stay for 12 days, RFB, which is room, food, and beverage. Everything was for free. We were first class everything. We were celebrities in the hotel because we were Wilfred's team, and they catered to us. He had a 10-round fight coming up at the end of in 10 days. So, and the training camp that we set up there for people, spectators to see. And when we got to the hotel, we were in the lobby, and we encountered at the foot of 2 big escalators in the Dunes lobby, a group of about 30 or 40, I would imagine they were Japanese tourists, because one guy was talking to them. I assumed he was probably the tour guide or the tour leader or whatever, the host. And he was talking to them, and he went on and on and on, and Jimmy is translating as he went on. He says, Rudy, he's telling them that we have a long list of wonderful sites to visit, but we have a tight schedule. So it's very, very important that everybody on the tour be very considerate. When we have to meet at a certain time, everybody has to be punctual and be on time so that we can carry out the whole itinerary and not miss anything that we want to see. And I looked at him. I said, Jim, you're pulling my leg? You speak Japanese? He said, Rudy, I'm not pulling your leg. That's exactly what he said. I speak Japanese. I said, well, how did that happen? He said, well, I was in the Army after college, and out of basic training, my outfit was ready to ship out to Korea to join the conflict. And an officer addresses our unit, and he says, our graduating class says out of basic training, and he said, the Army needs volunteers to learn either Japanese or Korean at language school. And he said, well, he asked the officer, do I have to go to Korea? He said, no. You're going to stay here in California, and you go right to Fort Ord up in San Francisco, and you go to language school if you qualify. So he said, I volunteer. He said, I don't want to go to Korea. He said, it was a major mess. Poor guys were suffering over there. It was terrible. Said, so I did qualify. They sent me to language school, and it was Japanese that I ended up learning, and I got pretty good at it. I said, well, Jimmy, you go from time to time, periodically, every couple of years, you have to go to Japan and negotiate with the TV network over there about licensing your film library, right? He said, yes. I said, wow, you speak Japanese. They must love you. No? He said, no. They don't. I said, why not? I had a Westerner that speaks fluent Japanese. He said, Rudy, they don't know I speak Japanese. I sit at the table. I don't even say sayonara when it's done. He said, I sit at the table and I listen to everything they have to say. And they talk freely in Japanese about how they're going to bargain this deal and how much they're going to offer now and how much they can go to later. And I just sit there with a dumb blank look on my face. He says, I practiced the look. He says, I'm good at it. He said, and I have like totally no recognition. But meanwhile, they're revealing all the cards they're going to play in the business deal. And I do very, very well out there. So I said, well, I guess speech is silver, but silence is golden for you. He said, that's for sure. He said, for sure. He says, I walk out of there with a great deal every time I go. In any event, things moved on, and Jimmy, over the years, and Bill Caton used to sponsor or support the old-time fight manager, Cus D'Amato. Cus D'Amato was a real character who was the manager of Floyd Patterson when he was world champion, heavyweight champion, and then Jose Torres when he was light heavyweight champion, and Jose became it was a special guy. Both of them became boxing commissioners at one time for New York at different times, and Jose even became a newspaper columnist, and he wrote a couple of books, very, very good. And Cus was a real character, and that's how I think he met Jimmy to begin with, and how they had a very close relationship. Cus had a house up in Athens, New York, which is a big old frame house with a lot of bedrooms. And he lived with a woman, Camille, who used to do all the cooking and cleaning and everything else. And she was his companion. They were in their 70s at the time. And they also had a bunch of young men who lived in the house. Most of them, it was a combination reform school and boxing academy. Some of the kids had never gotten in trouble, but they wanted to learn how to box. Other ones were sent to him to try to straighten them out because they had an inclination to boxing and they thought it might be good for them. And Jimmy and Bill would sponsor the whole operation along with the gym in the adjoining town that Cus operated on the second floor of a commercial building. And it was in Catskill, New York, the adjoining town to Athens. And the whole thing paid off very, very well in the long run because along the way, they discovered a former student of Cus became a corrections officer, and he was working at a nearby upstate reform school. And he had boxed with one of the kids in the school, a 12-year-old kid. And he was raving about this kid because the kid was like a man-child. He was super strong. He said, I'm 29 years old. He said, I get in the ring with this 12-year-old kid, and he's throwing me around like a rag doll. He said, like I wasn't even there. He says, he's brutally strong, and he's a tough kid. And I think he has the makings of a boxer. So he brought him to Cus, and he took a look at him. And Cus arranged to become that kid's guardian. He saw a world champion in the making, and he became that kid's guardian, legal guardian. That got him excused from the reform school into his own custody at the house, where he was trained by Teddy Atlas, who was Cus's protege trainer. Cus didn't do any of the hands-on thing. Teddy Atlas did it and brought this kid right through the amateurs. And that kid was Mike Tyson, who became world heavyweight champion. And he was managed by Jim Jacobs and Bill Caton out of their relationship with Cus. And it was a very fruitful relationship. The end of the story is when Cus died. Cus was like a grandfather to Mike Tyson, and Jimmy Jacobs was like a father figure to him. He would dote on everything they said. He was totally in their thrall. He taught him all about boxing history, and Mike was an avid student of boxing history. He loved it. It gave him a great purpose in life. He was a lost kid, and here he found a tremendous purpose. Problem was, Cus died, and Mike lost one of his guides. And Jimmy, unfortunately, died shortly thereafter. Mike was a heavyweight champ and had a few title defenses under his belt. And Jimmy was at age 52, passed away from leukemia prematurely. It was a tragic thing. And Tyson, the rest is history. With no Cus and no Jimmy Jacobs to guide him, the wheels came off, and his whole career took a bunch of crazy turns, which are historical. And I had asked Jimmy, and the reason he got involved with Cus to begin with, from the get-go, was Cus had this idea. And Cus had a lot of ideas. Jack Newfield, the newspaper writer, used to say about Cus, he was half genius and half crackpot, and you had to know which guy you were talking to at any given time. And Cus always had this theory that if he had the right specimen, the right athlete, a truly athletic individual, he could train that individual and do such a thorough job of training him that individual could have one fight for the heavyweight championship with no prior experience and win the title, which was a crackpot theory. But I think that's how he was first attracted to Jimmy, because he thought he saw in Jimmy the athlete that he could actually possibly do that with. But I don't think that ever worked out. In any event, when Jimmy died, I lost a world-class friend, and the world lost a world-class gentleman and athlete. And as a postscript, big fights. Bill Caton died shortly after Jim. And as a postscript, the big fights was sold by their widows to ABC Television, which now shows those fights in that library as part of their ESPN Classics showcase. Thanks for listening. Come back next week for another episode of Uncommon Law, lessons they don't teach in law school. I'm Judge Rudy Greco. Court is adjourned.